Hello everyone. In today's episode I want to share with you how you can get shallower depth of field in Unreal Engine while retaining the same aperture as well as framing in your scenes. And I'm bringing this up because I had a little trouble working this out. It's a super simple formula, but I thought we'd take this opportunity to also talk a little bit about depth of field. How do we create it in Unreal Engine? How do we make it shallower? And why does it give you the 35mm normal lens when you click create a camera, and all so forth. So to illustrate an example and tell you why I actually need to do this, I often need to shoot in confined environments for our project Heart of Mercy by St. Luke Productions. And I need to do this because the environments are, built in a certain way, they're realistic proportions, and there's only so much room I have to shoot with. So I like to shoot with an 18mm lens at a 16:9 default sensor size that Unreal Engine gives me. But the problem is that gives me relatively deep focus here. So this is what happens at f2.8. I can decrease that up to 1.8, but that's basically a hard-coded value in Unreal Engine. I can't go lower than that. Unlike in Blender, where I can literally shoot with 0.2 if I wanted to get a really, really shallow depth of field. So I've come up with this that lets me go and make that definitely shallower, but not change the framing, because that would mean a ton of work for me and I don't want to invest that. I've also been able to do this. So this is basically another way of doing that with more depth of field. So this is the default, and this is what I've been able to come up with here. So for those of you who want to know the solution immediately, it's actually fairly simple. You multiply the focal length by the same number that you also multiply the sensor width and sensor height by, and that'll give you a shallower depth of field while retaining everything else. This is an article on my website. I'm going to leave that in the description. If you're only interested in that information, great, go there and apply that. I'm going to show you how to set this up now, and I'm going to also give you some background information, probably over explaining things that you didn't want to know, but I thought I'm going to do this anyway because it is quite neat to know. So let's jump into Unreal Engine. Let's get started. If you're interested, I'm using the Nia character here by Reolution for that. There's two versions of it for free on the Fab Marketplace. One is the control rig version and one is just the character, and I believe the control rig comes with both versions. I've actually forgotten now, but I think I'm going to use the control rig version here, but we're not worrying about the control rig at all. It's just, this is the character that I'm using. I'll also leave a link to the description there if you're interested. This is, I believe, how it comes, and I'm going to go and do this because in all likelihood that is probably how your Unreal Engine looks a little bit as well, unless you probably have these stacked up here, but that's fine. I'm going to go and save this as a new level, and then I'm going to go and start from scratch. So I'm going to call that one Nia DOF demo. And I don't really want to use this version of Nia because that's the blueprint, and I just want to use the skeletal mesh. I also don't want to use this camera here or this. I'm going to leave the post-process volume and I guess the plane here. That's fine. So I'm going to go and drag in the skeletal mesh here because I don't want to deal with control rigs, and here she is. Is she? She sort of is. She sort of is. Let's give her a little bit of light here. I'll give her an idle pose, and let's say this is what we want to shoot. And in order to create my camera, I'll do that from the sequencer. So I'll go and create myself a level sequence first, and then we can go dial all these properties in. I'll save that in cinematics, and I'm going to call that one SQ Nia DOF demo as well. Here it is. And in order to set a camera, I'll just go and click that little camera icon, and that sort of frames up what I see in the viewport here. And while it does happen, it also zooms me in a little bit more. So that's sort of mystery number one. Why does that happen? I can see here on the camera settings tab here under the current camera settings that I'm seeing a current focal length of 35mm, and I'm also seeing that I'm using the 16:9 digital film back here. And while that's all good, I'm going to call this one cam 1, and I'll just say default here. I need to now zoom out a little bit. I also need to set the focus in a second here, but let's say this is how I want to frame Nia up. We don't currently see anything in the background, so I'm going to need to work on that as well. So I'll go and save this, drop out of that. Also, what I don't want, and this is an Unreal Engine thing really, I don't want to see these camera previews here. So camera preview, I'm going to go and disable the preview selected cameras here, because that's a bit nicer. I'm going to go duplicate Nia a couple of times. So one maybe further in the back, sort of here, and then I'm going to go and make another copy even further back. And because we don't really see our Nias here all that well, I'm going to go and give them some light from the top here. Nothing fancy, just a rectangle light. Something like that. That we're also going to go and rotate around. I should have put snapping on here, then it would snap to 90. There we go. That's nice. And this is one for her. And then there's another one for the other Nia, which is sort of down here. My goodness, that's going to need a little bit of more additional floor here. So this is just so that we can see the other Nia here. She's here, and she is, where is she? I could have prepared this, but hey, where's the fun in that, huh? So this is her faraway Nia, and this is Nia who's not quite even in the frame, like something like this. I'll go and make another copy of her like so. So we've got lots of characters dotted around. There we go. And that's our framing here. And of course we want to go and frame Nia up. So I can go into the camera component here, and then first of all go into the manual focus distance here. Open up my focus settings and set this to tracking. Or I can use a numeric value. Tracking, I have to go and open this up and then pick myself an object. Let's say this Nia. And that works most of the time, but notice that when you pick an object, it'll always look at the origin point there. So that's in between her feet. So that sometimes skews the accurate focus position off. So what I like doing is I'll create myself a basic actor object, and I'm going to call that one the focus helper or something like that. And that's the one I can go and move around where it needs to be. And I'm doing that partly also so that I can track focus properly. So if I wanted to have focus that moves from one point to another, that can't be tied to a character object because that character might be doing something else at that point. So in my camera's component, I'm going to go and pick that object now, the focus, or pick it from the list down there. Perfect. So now that's definitely framed up. So as I said, I want to shoot with an 18mm lens because of my environment. So why has Unreal Engine, why is it always giving me 35mm? That's an interesting thing to think about. It's the so-called normal lens for the current sensor size. And that might sound weird because, well, what is a normal lens? Wikipedia has a description on that. It's something that mimics the field of view of humans for any given sensor size. So it's important to remember that a normal lens isn't valid across, like the same millimeter number isn't valid across all kinds of sensor sizes. So every sensor size has a particular normal lens, and it's the diagonal of the sensor in millimeters. Technically, the diagonal of the square of the sensor. So if you think about 35mm photography, where we have a sensor size of 24 by 36 millimeters, then the diagonal of that would be a diagonal in a rectangle. But technically, we're cropping a picture. The lens is round. The square of something like the film format would fit right in there. And even though we're cropping that off a little bit, that's really not the lens's fault because it'll still go by the square. So if we calculated the diagonal of 36 by 36 millimeters, we will arrive at something along the lines of 50 millimeters. And that is exactly the normal lens for 35mm film. And that is exactly what Unreal Engine does here as well, because I'm shooting with a film bag of 16 by 9. If we expand that, I can see the sensor size of that, which is 23.76 by 13.365 millimeters. And that's sort of what 35mm motion picture film would be shot on, which is not 24 by 36 lengthwise. They have it upside down, so they still have something like a 24mm width if you shoot without the audio track, but they don't have 36mm height. They would have a height of 18mm. So that's approximating that. It's not exactly that, but if you follow the math, it is basically exactly by the same logic. So we have the square of the larger one. So let's say, I'm going to round this up. We're going to say 24. So by a Pythagorean algorithm here, if you remember that from school, a to the power of 2 plus b to the power of 2 equals c to the power of 2. So we're going to get this value, get the square root out of that, and that is our normal lens. So if we follow this example, 24 by 24 equals that, plus the same value is that. So that's basically c. So we've had a to the power of 2 plus b to the power of 2. Now we're going to go and get the square root out of that, which is 33.9, which is very close to the 35 millimeters that Unreal Engine is giving us here. So that is why this is even happening. This is why we're getting the 35 millimeter lens when we create a default camera, because it gives us the normal lens. So I want to shoot with something more like an 18 millimeter lens. And then, of course, I can zoom in, grab my camera here, zoom in, whoops, a little bit too fast. And now I can see what my depth of field is. So it is certainly, it's there, but it's not as shallow as I would like it to be. Also, maybe this guy here, I'm going to go and make that invisible. One thing of note, to preview depth of field properly, you really have to be in cinematic mode in Unreal Engine. Currently, I'm not showing anything of what mode I'm in Unreal Engine, and that means I'm in epic mode. Epic mode is something that is pretty good, but it could be more accurate, namely with cinematic mode. If you see something else, you can directly click on it and change it. If you don't, you head over here to settings, engine scalability settings, and then over here epic. This is what my computer usually defaults to, but you can go to high, which is a little lower than that. If you look at that, then you see that the depth of field isn't being rendered at all anymore. So if you're in high or anything lower than that, you don't see any depth of field, even though it might be enabled in your project. But if you set it to cinematic, then you see the proper cinematic quality of as much depth of field as can be there. So as much as can be. So you'll see here that I do have some depth of field. If I go and change my aperture from 2.8 and drag that lower, you'll see that my exposure is not automatically coming back here. So that is something we need to work on here. But you see that the depth of field is sort of getting shallower up to a point. It is getting up to, I think, 1.2, 1.8. I think it's 1.2. Anything lower than that doesn't get any shallower. Blender, for example, would do that, but Unreal Engine doesn't do that. So there's a hard-coded value in there. So if I wanted something even shallower, then I have a problem, because that's just not happening here. Let me go and fix the automatic exposure here just quickly. I'm going to go back to this, and then I'll go to that, and then I'll see what we need here to keep that stable. Let's say 3, 2.5. Let's say 3, so that we see the ladies in the background. It's a little bit overexposed, but we're going to be fine with that. So if I go and change my value here now, you'll see that only the depth of field changes, but not the exposure. See that here? But I'm at a limit here. So here's the thing. Let me go and set this to the default 2.8, and let me go and duplicate my camera here. I'll just say duplicate here. So now we have another camera. I'm going to call that one camera 2 shallower. And in here, I'm going to go and I'm looking through this now. It looks like my focus hasn't copied. So I'm going to go say tracking and set that up again. The same focus, same depth of field, same everything. Let me go and make my sensor size larger now. So this also happens in these settings up here. Film back. This is where I'm going to go, and I'm just going to type this value in at the end here. I'm going to say ×2. And then this is what that looks like. So that I've doubled my sensor size. And now I'm going to go to sensor height. I'm also going to type in ×2, and now that's also doubled. And now I technically see more. So currently depth of field hasn't quite changed yet, but if I go and change my focal length to something longer, namely also by the same value, so also ×2, then I have exactly the same framing that I had before, but with the same aperture, I now have a shallower depth of field. Let's just go look through my other camera, and that is indeed the case. If I switch between the cameras, you can see that is exactly what's happening. So yes, by that calculation, you can do double, quadruple, quintuple, whatever you want to do. If we do this again, so focal length, I can do this again, ×2, or type in 72, that'll be the same. Leave the aperture alone. Now I'm basically zooming in. There's my shallower depth of field as a result of that, as a result of having a longer lens. But of course now my framing is screwed up. So I'm going to go and do the same thing here. So on the film back settings, ×2, and then on the sensor height, I want to do the same thing, ×2. Sometimes millimeters changes to centimeters here. For Unreal Engine, it doesn't matter. It just goes and calculates this, and there we go. So now we can swap between very deep focus here and much shallower depth of field. That is all I have for you. I hope this made sense. I know it was a little bit longer and much more elaborate than you probably wanted to know, but I just had worked this out and I thought I wanted to share this with you. So yes, that is how you get a shallow depth of field while retaining both your aperture and your focal length. If you now want to make fine adjustments, you can of course go and twiddle with the f-stop here and make that shallower or wider or whatever look you prefer. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that. If you like this video, then please share it with friends, family, and total strangers, and join me for the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.